Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. And this is the show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHD. As I keep telling folks, I am a clinical neuropsychologist. I am in private practice. I see probably 50 to 60% of my patient load is ADHD, and I do mostly evaluations now, but for years I did a lot of therapy as well. And I'm also the father of a child with ADHD. Well, he's an adult now, so with ADHD. And back in the day, back when I was a parent of a young child with ADHD, we didn't know a whole bunch about ADHD. A lot of the research hadn't been done, a lot of the books hadn't been written, Matter of fact, I'm still amazed at this. I went through an entire American Psychological Association approved graduate program in clinical psychology and never heard word one about ADHD. Didn't know diddly about it, and it was never presented in a course. That still to this day amazes me. Nowadays we know a lot more. We have a lot more information, a lot more research has been done. Things are better. Some of the things that are still causing problems, I guess what I would say, are if we have antiquated attitudes towards ADHD ourselves. Okay, I mean, ideally, by now, everybody knows that ADHD is a neurologic condition. You are born with it. It runs in families. It is not volitional, that it is not under voluntary control. Okay? Your child is ADHD because somebody in your background or your spouse's background also has ADHD. And perhaps a lot of people. Matter of fact, probably a lot of people. I know, the heritability index is 85%. That is very high if you're familiar with those kinds of things at all. We usually say around 50% means there's a genetic component, and here we are at 85. Obviously, there's a genetic component. On the other hand, that doesn't mean we should feel guilty about it. Couldn't do anything about it. It isn't like you got an ADHD kid because mom ate too many candy bars during the pregnancy, or dad had a beer every once in a while during the pregnancy. I mean, none of that stuff matters, okay? And that is vitally important because a lot of people have this attitude that, the darn biggest problem I think with ADHD is it doesn't look like anything but a behavior problem. It's not just a behavior problem. It is the result of the way somebody's brain is working, which is a little different from neurotypical people. It just is. We could get into the biochemistry, but let's not, okay? But just the idea that you have to have it, and you have to look at your attitudes, because it's a long slog, okay? ADHD kids are on average about 3 years behind their peers in terms of developmental age. So if your child is 12, he's going to act more like a 9-year-old. That causes difficulties getting along with peers and that sort of thing. It also makes, 16 years old, I want my driver's license. Good. Ooh, that's a scary one, okay? But you've got to be ready to handle that. And the only way you can do it is to have a good science-based, knowledge-based approach to the whole deal with ADHD. And I know from personal experience, it's easy to take some of this stuff personally, and it's easy to get angry, and it's easy to say and do things that you, on better reflection, might say, I shouldn't have done that. That's probably going to come back. Because, this stuff. What you've got is you've got a fragile kid who's not fitting in. School is incredibly difficult for him. Depending on how much of the ADHD they've got, and you can have a little bit or you can have a whole bunch, it causes more or fewer, depending, problems socially. You've got, the other kids don't want to be around you because you get into trouble so much, or the other kids don't want to be around you because you're bossy and insist that everybody do what you want to do, or because you're always talking, or because you get angry so fast, all those kind of things. And, as the parent, it's not that easy either. You're having to deal with it basically 24 hours a day. And sometimes you don't get much support. Sometimes the teachers don't really know much about ADHD and just think there must be something wrong at home that's causing this child to have all this behavior problem, all these behavior problems. There's sometimes, the neighbors aren't really all that excited about having your child around. It's a not easy situation to be in, and it's. But again, you have to keep reminding yourself that it is not the child's fault. It is not willful behavior. Okay, there is a brain chemistry thing going on that makes it harder for him or her to sustain attention, to remember instructions, to plan, to organize, to recognize the passage of time. All those things are neurologic. They are symptoms of a neurologic-based disorder. And there's not much that you can, you have to keep reminding yourself of that, because if you don't, you'll just be, he or she's just acting like a little pain in the butt, and we're, I learned in the Marines how to handle pains in the butt. No, that's not going to work. That's not going to be good. That'll be real, real bad. So, parent attitudes are really important, because one of the other things that happens is that your child does not cope with change well. And I see that on the day after, or the morning after, I guess more accurately, daylight savings time went out, and we are back on whatever the other kind of time is. But we're an hour off. Even though it's not going the other way, when you go on to daylight savings time and you lose an hour of sleep, now you've got it back. But you may be surprised that your ADHD child does not do well. And that's perfectly to be expected. Your child has a certain pattern, a certain rhythm. It's virtually entirely subconscious, but now we're throwing it off. He gets up expecting that it's time to eat, and no, we're not going to do that yet. We're not going to get up yet. We're not going to, and then at night, when he's expecting to go to bed, it's, not yet. Or it's the other way, come to think of it. So you throw him off. because the clock changed. Now, we could argue about daylight savings time and why in the world we have such an inefficient, ineffective, what's it for anyway kind of system, and why we're the only country in the world who does this, and why we didn't fix it 100 years ago. Yeah, we could argue about that, but it would make much more sense to just get rid of it. There are a couple of states, Arizona for one, I went to graduate school there. They don't have daylight savings time. You can't believe how much smoother that makes the year. You also, you don't have to deal with, the hardest one for most people is when they go on daylight savings time and they lose an hour of sleep. So they're walking around like zombies for a couple of weeks or until, their biorhythms adjust. And then comes the other thing, when we get rid of daylight savings time, and the first night is like, oh, this is great, I get to sleep in an extra hour. But you pay for it. You pay for it on the other end. And anyway, it's a mess, and it shouldn't be, and it doesn't make any logical sense. Like many things that are occurring nowadays. But this will throw your kiddo for a loop, okay? They will tend to have more problems dealing with the change than you would expect. And, you might see an increase in acting out behavior, irritability, emotional stuff. And you're going, what the heck? Why would, this is nothing. It's a change. It's a big change. Whole hours. So expect that your child is going to be a little bit overreactive for a while until his biorhythms or her biorhythms adjust and adapt, which could take a couple of weeks. So enjoy that time. Okay, and of course, ADHDers, they like structure. They like things to happen a certain way. And they don't do well when any kind of change happens. If school all of a sudden started an hour later, that would mess them up. If school started an hour earlier, that would mess them up. And probably one of the more ignorant things I've heard of, some schools are in a scheduling style so that you don't have the same classes at the same time every day. It switches back and forth. That is like a nightmare for an ADHD child. First class on Monday is English, first class on Tuesday is math, and then it switches back and forth. And, oh, by the way, I've got to have different books for different days. And I've got a different schedule for different days. And that's a nightmare. And whoever the efficiency expert was who thought that was a good idea wasn't very realistic about schools. See, the thought was if you have fewer class changes, longer class times, there would be fewer dead times in the day. There would be less, keeping one eyeball on the clock as the last 10 minutes of a period go down, and that would have, I don't know what kind of amazing how they thought that was going to be a whole bunch better, but basically what happened was classes went from their usual 45, 50 minutes and to an hour and a half. Well, guess what that extra hour and a half does to an ADHDer? And think about the teachers too, because they're not teaching for a whole hour and a half. Most of them teach for one period and then have class work, in-class work, group work for the second part of that period. And guess when your ADHDers start getting into trouble? Right. Group work time. Okay. Everything goes faster and blah, 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 blah. Anyway. And then guess what? At the same time the next day, they don't have the same class. They have a different class. So these kids are literally being overwhelmed by change and by the organizational demands of this type of scheduling. And I hope that where your children go to school, they don't have this, but who knows? I mean, I know one thing. There are more fads in education than there are in blue jean makers. I mean, it's truly amazing. Stuff that is done without any solid research, without any, well, thinking it through. Anyway, enough of that. Again, that's change, though, and change is a problem. And even a little change like daylight savings ending may seem like not much. It can cause problems. So your job is to stand your ground and be calm about it and understand. I mean, that's the big thing. As a parent of an ADHD child, your ability to understand what's going on is so important. It's just incredibly important, and you have to remember that it's a neurologic condition. It is not willfulness. It is not disobedience. It is not all those other things that you've thought about calling it sometimes. It is a neurologic condition. It is a manifestation of the inability to maintain focus and working memory and time management and organization. And that's it. So, your child will have difficulties with change of any kind. His classroom teacher gets pregnant and they get a substitute for 3 or 4 months of the year. That is going to be a huge change. That is going to cause problems. Okay, and you just have to be observant, pay attention to what's different, and adapt and adjust accordingly. Okay, well, that's a couple of things that are near and dear to the whole ADHD thing. And this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is the show trying to make the world safe for ADHD. And remember, your child is an outside-the-box thinker. And those are the people who solve the world's big problems. So maybe your child will be the one who will solve global warming. Possibly. Okay, we'll catch you next time. Have comments or questions or anything somewhere down here, you can do that. And we'll catch you next time.